You guys, marriage is so flippin' hard. In fact, it's so hard that I go to marriage therapy every week, and I brought my therapist on set today to teach us so many valuable tools. You don't want to miss this.
Hey brave girl, how you do the things that you do?
Welcome to the Brave Talk Show, the show for brave women craving the connection that comes with real conversations about struggles, concerns, and TMI details we face every day. We have an episode every week, so be sure to subscribe and hit that bell notification so you can be brave with us. I'm Brittany.
And I'm Vanessa.
And I'm Teresa.
I'm Robyn.
And today we're talking about emotional boundaries in marriage. But first, we're going to start with our hot topic.
Yeah.
Hot topic.
Okay, so I'm really excited about this one. I want to know what you guys all think the salary would be of a stay-at-home mom.
$250,000.
Woo! Starting out the big games.
Girl.
I'm saying we do a lot.
Ooh.
I would say
value.
100,000 for me. 100.
I'm going to go 130. Michelle?
$1 million.
Yes. Yes.
I'm
All
with
right,
Michelle.
what's the answer? Brittany, do you even have an do you have an answer?
Of course I have
All
an
right,
answer.
good. She's a fact
queen, of course she
I'm
has
the
the answer.
fast queen. Okay, so according to a 2019 study on salary.com, the salary of a stay-at-home mom would be $178,201.
Woo!
I love that $1 at the end.
We are worth every last dollar. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So do you think that's fair? You think
I think
that's
so, because if
Yeah.
you think about it, we're not just mom. We clean. So if you think of a cleaning person, they get paid. And then we cook. We do the laundry. We take care of
We're the
kids.
chauffeur.
We drive all over the place.
We have to teach them crap.
Okay,
goodness.
I'm
You know?
gonna stand out and be different, and I might offend some people, but I'm gonna let you know right now, like these stay-at-home moms with one kid who act like they're so tired and they have so much to do, and I'm sitting over here with 4 kids and a job. Like, I am really quick to be like, girl, you do not know at all what it's like. There's so much more that they could be doing, especially like when I see like a husband who's struggling to like make ends meet, and I'm like, well, what does your wife do? Well, she's a stay-at-home mom. I'm like, but I can understand if you got like 3, 4 kids, I get that. But I was like, but she's got 1 kid? Like, you can't like have an MLM company on the side or something to like bring in some extra cash? Like, well, she doesn't have time. I seriously don't see it. I don't understand it. So sorry, I apologize. Please don't cancel me.
I know. I'm like,
Leave right here.
This is why I think my reply to that is like, I think everybody has a level. Having a kid is different for each person. You know what I mean? Where me as when I had one, I had a job. I was working. But there are some people having one, it is way more than they thought it could be. So I think that's where it's like, yeah, it's easy to say like, well, you could go get a job, you could go do this, but we don't know the capability of that one person with one child. I think that's the thing.
I think 1 kid is a lot harder than like 6 kids, honestly,
Yeah.
because like
It's hard.
I'm always offering to have neighbor kids come over because they entertain my kids, and my job's easier the more kids I have over at my
Yeah.
house. I don't know if that sounds so terrible, but I think one kid would be kind of hard for me.
It is
But it
hard.
does make me scratch my head when I had 1 kid, and I'm like, man, it was kind of easy back then.
Well,
Yeah. Michelle and
It was hard when I had 1, and now that I have 3, I'm like, man, 1. 1 sounds awesome.
Yeah,
You know?
I feel the
Yeah.
same. So I've always worked part-time and or
Yeah,
full-time
me
while still identifying as a full-time mom. Like,
Yeah.
I'm watching my own kids. I don't have childcare, and so looking back now that I have 4, I'm like, oh, 1. That was a sweet spot. Yeah. That was easier.
But you didn't know then it was
I
a
didn't
sweet
know
spot
then,
because
yeah.
it was hard. I like
Yeah.
having 3. Like I'm just like I don't think that's what my husband the other day. I'm like I don't think motherhood is for me. So I'm all okay with working full time and you stay at home dad.
What did
Like,
he think of that?
He's like, yeah, I'll do it. And I'm like, what? Yeah.
That
He's
is
all for it
awesome.
because he's like, I can do my public speaking and
Is that what you guys are
acting.
doing? Like, is that kind of your
Yeah, so once I went to my master's, like I think at one point we will do that switch where he doesn't have a 9 to 5 and I carry the 9 to 5 and he does his singing, his hosting, like kind of like those gigs because I don't know, I always like, before I got married, I told him, I was like, I'm a working person. Like I cannot stay at home. But I've always stayed at home with my kids though,
Yeah.
but yeah.
I feel like a stay-at-home mom is kind of like a lost art. You guys feel like that?
Yeah.
It's like a dying breed.
Oh, I am a hot mess mom. I am a hot mess mom. Like, there's no Pinterest cakes for me. Like, it's not gonna happen. Like, it's not.
We are basic necessities at my house.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you're breathing, Happy birthday.
I've seen one of your birthday parties. Don't even try to pull this
Tell me, which one? I'm curious.
Your little guy's like second birthday or first birthday.
Okay, actually, that was my best mom moment. That was the one time I looked at my friend Jamie. I'm like, Jamie, I want to be a Pinterest mom one time. Because I'm usually like, go to classic skating.
I hope you took a ton of pictures.
Oh, I did. Yeah, that was a one and done, and it was like a $5,000 circus party.
I am not that mom. Like, I'm not creative. But I put my kids in stuff. Like, you can do sports, but like, make your cake. Like, what?
Yeah,
I get annoyed when they ask me to bring snacks to the soccer game. I'm like, okay, a bunch of oranges and some like juice cups. There you guys go.
Well, at least you're healthy on my Little Debbie. Wrap it up.
I feel guilty right now. My kindergarten get like circle time, and you have to sign up at school. And I haven't signed up one this year. And they sort of email, there's 3 more spot open. I'm like, I got work. Like, and my husband's like, you probably should do one. And I'm like, okay, if I have to. Like, it's hard.
Do you guys feel like stay-at-home moms get the recognition they deserve?
No.
I think it's coming back. At least, okay, so in my community, I'm a Christian, and a lot of the people that I went to church with where I lived in California, like stay-at-home mom was the way to go. As a matter of fact, it was like if you worked, people were like,
It used to be like that here, though.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and so it was very much elevated, and it was like almost like you had to explain yourself if you had to get a job.
Yeah.
So I've actually experienced the opposite, where it was more elevated to be a stay-at-home mom. You love your kids more, all that kind of a thing. You know what I mean? So don't you be touching me, girl.
Yeah.
So bringing out the sass and Teresa.
Sorry.
She got that beanie on. What's in that hat? I love it. No, I think that's pretty prevalent here too. Like I've always been a working / stay-at-home mom, but I didn't like to showcase that I was working full time because it felt frowned upon in even my own family. Like there was passive aggressive shames and and so I was like, I'm a full-time mom, but like I'm trying to make $1 million on the side, So then I ended up kind of surrounding myself as I've come more into myself, like with other women who are in the same boat, and now we have this little power community where we feel each other. Yeah.
I've been like super envious of women that are content being home. And I had a long time where I was like, I felt bad that being home wasn't fulfilling enough for me. And so I think it's different strokes for different folks.
Definitely.
Right?
Yeah.
I like that slogan.
Yeah,
I love that.
That's why she's a therapist.
Yeah, so speaking of which, introduce us.
This is Michelle Pomeroy. She has been married for 16 years, and she's enjoyed most of them, which shocking that a marriage counselor would say that, right? She's got 3 kids. She's a licensed associate marriage and family therapist. She's from the beautiful Red Rocks of St. George originally. She loves long walks, preferably at the beach.
Yep.
How'd you land in Utah? I know. Right? I know.
I don't know.
Her favorite place to be is the outdoors, and she's considering becoming a vegetarian after watching some documentaries recently.
Yep.
We got to hear more about that. Michelle feels things really deeply. She loves home improvement projects, and her so delicious order is the Diet Second Wife.
Yep.
Mic drop. Isn't she the coolest therapist? And she's the cutest therapist.
She's pretty cute.
Yeah.
We're so
nice.
happy to have you here, Michelle.
I'm so
Teach
excited.
us all the things. We're going to go home better wives after this, right?
So she's going to be teaching us all about emotional boundaries. So let's just start with the question, what is a boundary in marriage?
Yeah, boundaries, it's one of those words that gets thrown out a lot. People talk about you got to have better boundaries. It's a little bit of a buzzword. So I think it's important to kind of define it to get started. So thank you for asking that. So I like to think of a boundary as basically defining where one person stops and the other person starts. So it's like a fence that outlines property. It says that this property is this, and it gives a little bit of structure, right? So in every relationship, there are 3 entities. There's you, there's me, and there's us. And so we have our own world. It's like, okay, I came up with this metaphor, and I am a sucker for metaphors, but I don't know if it's going to land.
Oh, it's going to be great.
So here's what I imagine when I think of boundaries. So taking that fence metaphor, I like to think about how we all kind of have our own acreage that we're responsible for. We are responsible to take care of it. We're responsible for everything that's within that realm. So when you're in a relationship, you have your acreage and your spouse or partner has their acreage. However, that is only the you and the me, right? So where does the us come into play? So I imagine in my mind that there's what I like to call the us park that lives between the 2 properties. and that they each have a gate that they can enter this us area together. So there are different things that are held in each of those spaces. So when you come into the us park, that's where you find support. That's when you find the area that you can share your thoughts, your opinions, where you can connect physically, where you can have meaningful sex. All of those things happen in the us area, but we also have our own worlds. And in order to feel healthy, in order to be satisfied in relationships, we have two basic needs. One is for autonomy and independence, so that's being our own person, and the other is to belong and to have connection, and that's that us park.
I love that. I feel like that's one thing that kind of switched my marriage, is just that like I needed to find myself. Like I still have my own identity in this marriage and this, Yeah. And I think once I did that, it was like kind of like earth awakening. Like I was like, whoa, I have my own emotions. I have my own thing that I can, have those feelings without feeling like I need to rely on that person for that. So I think that is beautifully explains that.
You killed that metaphor, Michelle.
Yeah.
I love it. Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are some of the boundaries that should be in the us park versus like in your own little acreage?
So there are a lot of different boundaries, right? We put boundaries on our time, finances, our mental state, our emotions, even physical boundaries. There are a lot of different kinds of boundaries. When I work with couples, I see mostly couples. I do mostly couples counseling. So where I see that they get stuck usually is, or most commonly, is with emotional boundaries, meaning they let the other person, they kind of get swallowed by the other person's emotions. Dependency emotionally, where they get swallowed by the other person, or they blame the other person for their situation. And so it's just very much like too much overlap with the emotion. And that shows up in a lot of ways that can be really dysfunctional in a marriage or in a relationship.
I think that was me for like 10 years.
How did it look for you?
Just very codependent. I needed him to make me happy, and I really wanted him to need me.
Yeah.
Like I needed him. I'm like, you're supposed to need me. And the fact that he was so interdependent, that really upset me being codependent. And so I would take offense to it. And I thought, no, you're supposed to need me too, just like I need you. And it just caused a lot of emotion. He's like, no, you need to be independent and free. And actually the last, I don't know, probably 4 years, the thing that he's loved the most is he's commented and told me this, is seeing me blossom, because I've finally stepped away from that codependency, and I've taken that role of like, oh, this is Brittany. This is what Brittany likes to do independently of Benton. And it's been so wonderful for our relationship, not only just me, but also our relationship which is so ironic that you think like cutting that cord isn't going to be good for us, but it's been wonderful.
Yeah, I really think it's such a huge irony that the stronger we are as people, like the more core strength we have to hold ourselves and to be responsible for our inner world, our thoughts, emotions. It allows us to show up differently in the relationship, and it builds the relationship. But also, the stronger and more secure and safe you feel in your relationship, that gives you the wings to fly to go out and find yourself. So things that might seem like they're at odds are actually very complementary of each other.
But Michelle, do you think it can go, well, I'm sure it can. So like, what if you feel that the two partners are way too independent?
Yeah.
Like, and maybe she's probably like, sweetheart, that's not your problem. But I sometimes feel like Johnny and I are so independent that sometimes we live our own different lives. We don't rely on one another, and then it's really hard to connect.
Totally, yes. So it's interesting that if you become too overlapped, you kind of lose yourself, right? But if you kind of go the opposite direction and spend most of your time in the you and me worlds, you end up being really lonely.
That's us. Damn it, that's us. That's my hammer. We're just
wanted her on here for a free counseling session.
Yeah, like this is a free session.
You're just watching.
Yeah.
But it's a lonely place. So here's another metaphor. Some really great clients kind of came up with this with me. It's like it's like you're running on your own hamster wheels parallel to each other, and you keep looking at each other going, look how hard I'm working for us. And but you're just running on that wheel, and there's no overlap. There's
that. And the minute you say
one.
that, I felt it because like that's my husband. Like we both work really hard. Like we are hardworking. And when we lose sight of it sometime, and we take that moment to be like, we haven't done anything together, and my husband will be like, I'm working hard for the family. And the minute he said that, it's kind of, it's supposed to make you feel good because he's working for the family. But then you're like, oh, we haven't connected this week. We come home, we go to sleep, we feed the kids, and we just passing. And I'm like, and I remember one of my professors said, that's why marriage, a lot of people, when kids moved out, it will not make it because you've been so focused on the family and making it happen that you've lost yourself in that connection with your partner, and now you're trying to be like, who is this person? Like, who are you? So it's really hard to find a balance, but you have to find it.
So how do you do it? What do you say to the two interdependent couples?
Yeah, so I kind of look at it as like a Venn diagram, right? Where we have each person, it's very independent, but we don't want them to be on top of each other. We don't want them to be separate, but it is just kind of a little bit of a merging, a little bit of a sharing. It requires two things. It requires you to see your partner, and it requires you to be seen by your partner. It requires that you have to be able to share your life with them, which also requires knowing yourself. So how can you share yourself until you do the work to understand what's happening inside for you?
Wow, I love that. So how do you help a couple that comes to you? I think in the culture of Utah, I think a lot of people go into marriage, like she was saying, like that husband's supposed to take care of you, be there for you. Because like I have friends that have been married, and that's the struggle they're going through, is just like the expectation they had for their husband, and it's not fulfilling because that husband is like, you want me to what? You want me to emotional?
All of that.
Like, and especially if you can't do it for yourself, how do you expect that person to do it? Like, so what advice do you give those that are like, my husband need to do all this stuff for me?
Yes. Okay. Well, let me give you an example. Might be a personal example. May or may not be personal.
Is it from Robyn?
I'm excited. Is her name Robyn?
No, personal.
Oh, for you.
Okay.
I was like, this is
It would have
breaking HIPAA.
been way juicier, huh?
Yeah.
No, so this is also an example of how, like, not having clear emotional boundaries. So this is my husband and I pretty early on in marriage. We this kind of all ties into where we started today. When I became a mom, it was a really big struggle for me. It threw me. I ended up having postpartum depression. My son had major health issues right out of the gate, had surgery at 5 weeks old. I just felt like I was drowning. Breastfeeding wasn't working, couldn't do anything right, you know. We were living away from family. We were living in California, and I just felt overwhelmed, over my head. My husband, on the other side, was having this experience of being in a graduate school program, trying to please the professor that he was working with, trying to feel like a good student, a good employee, a good husband, a new father, and was just really torn. And so these two people that were just kind of in an overwhelmed place trying to interact with each other, it kind of ended up looking like he'd come home from work, and I would get upset with him for being 10 minutes late because I am drowning and I just need his help, and I want him to rescue me from how hard my life is, you know? So he'd step in and he'd be like, yeah, I can do that, because that's what good husbands do, is come in and help / rescue their wives. Well, it kind of worked, right? We do things that work typically. It worked somewhat until it didn't work anymore. And we started realizing that that sort of relationship is not the one that was serving us and was not what we wanted. And so we started doing some work. But before, you know, in that stage, there was just a lot of, that was kind of that overlap. Like, he was taking ownership of my experience. I was letting him, I was wanting him to take it. I wasn't owning it for myself. And so just a lot of that kind of blurred stuff happening.
You bring up an interesting point that, and again, I love that you said that you brought it back to our initial conversation about, you know, being a stay-at-home mom. I think that's probably one of the reasons why I end up going and working, because when I have had those seasons when I've been like, you know, maybe it was summer. I used to be a teacher, so I might have had a summer vacation where I wasn't working at all, and I got to experience what it was like to be a stay-at-home mom, and because I didn't have like my career, I hate saying that because being a stay-at-home mom there's such a wonderful. I mean, what you're doing for your kids is so amazing and powerful, and all the things that you can do. But I think a lot of stay-at-home moms that I've talked to, they can get in this feeling of like, what am I doing? Like outside of being a mom, like, do I have anything that makes me me? I've lost who I was. Who am I now? I'm just a mom. I'm just a milk machine. I'm just a toy picker upper.
Yeah.
You know, and then that can kind of take away a bit of your identity.
Yeah.
And so for the women who have either chosen not to work or it just doesn't work for their lifestyle, you know, that kind of a thing, what might you recommend for them who are feeling like, I need help, you know, my husband gets to go do all these amazing things while I'm home, and to be able to find a sense of her own acre, you know, that she can find joy in.
And I went through that. I don't know, maybe you can elaborate on that. I remember when we first got married, same thing, move away from our families, and it was just me. And then, as you know, my husband is like doing all this thing. Like I helped put him to graduate school, music, he got a hosting job, but like I say, I always wanted to like accomplish thing. And then I remember one time, like I started to resent him. Like, and I think that's when I had to check myself, because I was just like, I'm just a mom, which is a great thing.
It is.
But
I don't know why
I'm
we
just
do
like,
that
I
to
went to that
ourselves.
part where I was just like, I'm just a mom. I'm still in school. I haven't accomplished the thing I'm gonna do. I'm about to be 30s, and I remember like would have emotional like breakdown because it was just so hard. And I think just like Brittany, it was just like I was relying on him all the time to boost me, because I was boosting him, and I was waiting for him to like boost me to do it. Where I had to stop and be like, I have to do this thing by myself. Like I have to get up. Like, you know how you start your business. Like I'm gonna do it. And he supported the minute I do it, because it wasn't like he's telling me I needed to stay home, I needed to watch the kids. And, he, you know, it's just like, why does he have to stop his thing for me to order to do mine? So I just kind of took like I remember having a mental breakdown, and we did therapy, kind of the same thing too. And then it was just like, okay, I need to figure out my own life. Like that's when I separated the us, like, you know, the us, the you, and the me. So that's why that like spoke to me, because I was like, I went through all that. Like I felt that.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's when you established your acre.
Yeah.
Your own land.
My own land.
And so, you know, she did it with work, but what about someone who work is not you know, having a career or something like that is not an option, or they don't want to do that? Like, what else can they do?
It's actually a really good question, because my story is similar too, where I decided that like my purpose, what I wanted to do, I went back to school 10 years after being a stay-at-home mom for 10 years. I went back to graduate school to become a therapist, and there was a lot of like finding my own identity. So I don't know. That's a really great question of how can women do that, and I would love to know how other women do that. It's like I would love to talk to those women that say they are fulfilled being home, and what does that look like, because that's not my experience.
So for me, my experience is I don't ever have any goals of building a huge business. Like I have my company, but my goal with that isn't to you know, build a multi-million dollar, and then sell it and go live the good life. That's not my goal at all. I am super happy being a stay-at-home mom. That was always my goal. That is my dream. I love being home, and when my little guy asked me to go ride his bike, I can go out there with him. Like I love sitting on my porch and watching my kids play. I love being the stay-at-home mom, but I need something else as well. And that doesn't mean that I'm going to go get a job or an MLM or anything like that. I just needed a hobby.
Or purpose.
And
something
so
fulfilling.
that, and that's exactly what I got. Being outside, being, you know, having my own time where I could take some self-care weekends, or just some time where before I never felt like I could ask my husband for that time, whereas all of a sudden I gave myself permission, like, no, I need this time, I deserve this time, I'm a human being, and I just started taking that time. And that's what made the difference for me. It wasn't a job, it was more like a hobby and taking time for me.
And I think the thing is, for me, like if you ask, like some of my friends go through the same thing, and I don't think it's a job thing. I think you just have to take that realization. I think that separation of like, what makes me happy? Like, I'm not trying to be like, you know, when I tried the influencer stuff when I first started, and I got all these followers, I was just like, this is not for me. Like, that's why like I don't post as much anymore, because it's just like, it's not what fulfills me. I'm not wanting to be famous. I'm not wanting to be, you know, big. I just want to do something that makes me happy. And if people like it, great. If people don't, I'm okay with that. So I love that. Like for the people that are struggling or finding like, where do I find myself? is just like find your purpose. It doesn't have to be a big business. It doesn't have to be that. Just what's gonna, some girls trip sometime. Like, hey, I just gonna go on a girls trip.
Yes.
And I love what Brittany mentioned about like she almost felt like she had to ask, but that's ridiculous but it's a common issue is this this mom guilt that we have, like that, I don't know, I'm supposed to do this and I don't deserve to do that. I don't know why we get that, but I know that I have it, and I've talked with other women, and it is a common issue where we feel like we have to, like, I don't know, like we just don't deserve it or something. Is that something that you see often in?
Yeah, I think there are definitely some things that keep people kind of living in that us park and not wanting to explore their own world. And it's kind of twofold. It takes bravery and courage to go out there, but also if they can find the support and security in their relationship, that gives them the permission without asking permission to say, yes, please go out and explore and find your purpose and dive in, please.
Yeah.
So how do you start or make boundaries? Like, how do you start doing that? How do you start putting the fence up?
Yeah, so when we look at it on like this kind of broad perspective, it really is about learning to own your own world, learning to really like take it as yours. Even to the point of befriending the parts of yourself that you don't like, being able to just own it. I think that's really kind of that the biggest part, or that is the work. That is the work. And then there are other ways that you can, I could sit and kind of give you a list of do these steps to implement a boundary, but that's just steps.
So here's an example of one. Like you brought up before about the common issue is like one person being swallowed up by the emotions of another.
Yes.
So let's put ourselves in that situation. So we're having an argument with our spouse. Maybe we're swallowing them up with our emotions, or they're swallowing up with their emotions. Maybe we're both doing it to each other.
Yep.
If we were to be the ones to want to stop this
Yep.
and say, okay, we can't do this anymore.
Yep.
What might be something that we can do? Let's say that we're the one who is being swallowed up by the emotion. What can we do in that situation to start establishing a boundary?
So the first step is always to breathe. It's always bring yourself back into your body. Understand or become aware of what's happening in your body. We kind of, when we get into those escalations or when we feel like we're getting swallowed up, we kind of lose touch with ourselves a little bit. So it's very much breathing does that. So take some breaths, slow it way, way down, because when we start getting escalated, we go fast. We want to go fast. So it's slowing it down, improving your kind of awareness, and then check in with the story. What am I telling myself right now? What's the story I'm telling myself about me? What am I telling myself about my husband in this moment? Am I saying things like, my life is so hard and he needs to be helping? Or am I saying things like, my life is hard, but I'm a capable person. I would like it if my husband would just see that, right? That's a different story.
How do you communicate that boundary? Like, I guess, like, you have your partner and you feel like you need those boundaries. Like, how do you sit down and communicate that boundary?
Yeah, so boundaries can be internal or external, right? So typically, when we're talking about emotional boundaries, we're talking about internal boundaries that don't even necessarily need to be communicated with your husband. You're not asking him to do something different. You're holding yourself differently.
You're not like, I'm going to go take 3 deep breaths now.
Yeah.
You just go take 3 deep breaths.
Okay,
More
that
like
makes
setting-
a lot of sense.
That makes sense
So
to me too.
my husband and I, we could trigger each other pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And it's due to our own like childhood issues, right?
Absolutely.
And so my husband will say something that's maybe he can be a little harsh sometimes with his words. And what happens is when he says something that I find harsh, and maybe he didn't even mean for it to be harsh, that's just how he is sometimes. What would happen with me is inside my head, I would go things like, he doesn't love me, he doesn't hear me, he doesn't understand me. And then that's rehearsing in my head, and then it shuts me down. Then I give him the silent treatment because he doesn't love me and he doesn't understand me and he doesn't listen to me. And then now he's like, what the heck is going on? Now I'm getting the silent
Where'd you
treatment.
go? Yeah.
And so, and then we get in this vicious cycle. And what I was so tired of it. This was like last year during COVID. Oh my God. COVID. Bring out
You and
COVID.
everyone else.
Yeah, I have nowhere to go.
During COVID.
Yeah, and we have a business together, so you can imagine like we're just like 100%.
Yeah.
And I was talking with one of my friends, and she didn't use that word boundary, but that makes a lot of sense. She basically told me, like, think about what you're thinking when he says those things, and then ask yourself, is that really, really true? Like, you know your husband.
Yep.
You know how much you love him, how much he loves you, and all those things. And sometimes she said it's basically reminding yourself that those aren't true.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, what he said felt very unloving, but I know my husband loves me.
Right.
What he said made me feel like I wasn't understood, but I know that and reminding yourself those truths. And then she said that I probably, if I do that, I may not shut down as much. And I have to say, it totally helped. And it actually was able to help me be able to verbalize and say, okay, I just need a break right now. I'm feeling very this, or very that, and then maybe we can come back to this too later. And it de-escalated much more quickly when I reminded myself like what I'm lying to myself about.
Yes, because we tell ourselves those stories when we're feeling scared or that the relationship is in a threatening place. The story changes, right? So you can be married to the biggest jerk one moment and the most amazing person the next. Because and it depends on the state. It depends on your state and what's happening in the relationship, right? So it's state dependent. If you are feeling upset, if you're feeling disconnected from him, you're going to think he's a jerk. Or you could more easily think he's a jerk.
I think we're so emotional, like, you know what I mean? So when your husband's coming at you, that person that's supposed to love you and saying things at you, I don't think your mind, like, works to where it's just like, he loves me, da-da-da. It's just like, you just, like, especially if you've been having a hard time and a hard day and those are coming. And sometimes it is, like, I do realize, like, if I will lose it, but then just, like, okay, this is not personal. You know what? I'm not going to claim it.
Yeah.
I am not going to claim that I'm this person, so... You can say it all you want, but I am not going to take that.
And that's a good point, because then we become somebody that we don't even like. Because we react, we get triggered, we do these things, and it's like, who is this person that I'm being? And now your spouse is experiencing this awful person, so they've got their whole story. So I'm sure you're seeing in your counseling two different sides of like, she's always this, well, he's always that. And each one of us feels so justified because the other person meant to do it, but I don't think most of the time we mean to.
Right.
Okay, Michelle, so what do you do after you check your story?
Yeah, so at that point, you're able to lean into your partner or your significant other's experience, right? I like to do that by basically saying, it's not about me. Let me lean into their experience. Let me get curious about what's happening for them, rather than it reflecting on who I am. So him getting upset doesn't mean something about me, it means something about him. So if I can say, okay, what's happening? And even asking him, what's happening for you right now? Rather than me personalizing it. That's a really good way to de-escalate it, right? And that's giving him the space to feel, again, back to those emotional boundaries, his own feelings. You're not trying to take them on yourself. You're not trying to fix them. And he's not trying to get you to take them. Yeah. So by you being able to, that's that separation that's so necessary.
I love that. I love that too.
And after that point, after you like really lean in and really get curious about it, there is a point when you need to understand that you've done as much as you can do, right? So all you can do is offer support. You can't solve it for that person. So being able to say, okay, like this is the point where I can leave and I can resume life, where it's not so consuming that it's impeding functioning outside of what's happening in that interaction, right? So just being able to step away. The way that I learned to do this was with my clients, because I have 50 minutes with a client. They come in and they sit down, they share what's happening for them, and in that 50 minutes, I can lean in, I can get curious, I can help, I can understand, but I can't solve it for them. I can't fix it for them. And I have to trust that when they leave the room, they're going to be capable of solving it or be capable of carrying what they need to carry. And I have to be able to release it in a way that I can be ready for my next client, so that I have the ability to step into another us park with a different person and be able to fully engage in that way.
Okay, question for you.
Yeah.
So when you were talking about asking, asking that person, what are you feeling right now, right? And so let's say they said, okay, I'm feeling this, and so you realize it comes out like when you say these things, I feel this. Okay. So now, what do you do from there? Is it because like on one hand, I can see the other person going, oh, okay, well then I will try not to say those things or say it in that way anymore because I don't want to trigger you.
Yeah.
But I can see another type of personality say, well, what I said was not wrong. That's your problem. You need to figure out how to handle that better.
I've never heard that before.
Right.
Yeah.
So is there a right answer to that?
Yeah, well, it comes from a different place. It comes from a place of judging or a place of curiosity. So if you're saying, that's your problem, you need to fix that, that's coming from a place of judging on what's what and how they need to be solving it. If you're coming at it from, wow, I noticed that something just came up for you. What is happening? Where did this come from? That's coming from a very different place of being curious and wanting to understand them. We as humans, that's what we want. We want to be understood. We want to be seen. No matter what interaction we're happening, no matter the words that we're saying, the way that we're saying them, that's always what we're needing. Yep.
I feel like my biggest takeaway from you is that in your marriage, if you're struggling with your husband or you're struggling in your marriage, focusing on you as an individual is the best way to heal your marriage. Because if you get curious about your own emotions and why you're having those thoughts, maybe negative thoughts about your husband or different problems in your relationship, there's nothing you can do about him, right? You can't control him. You can't make him act a certain way or make him feel a certain way, but you can challenge your own story, like you said, and you can get curious about where he's coming from, and it starts with you.
And I think also if you take the NU, once you go with NU, then you're able to more like become logic. Then you can have a sit down and be like, hey, this is what I'm going through, this is what, and I think it's more likely to have a conversation where the emotion is not so high and being so defensive because you have worked it through yourself to realize like this is where I'm at. But I think it should be shared. Like this is where I'm at. Like this is what's going on with me. Like, you know, so yeah, I love that.
Awesome. We all owe Michelle for a free session. Thank you so much. So Michelle, where can our viewers find you?
Yeah, probably find me easiest on Michelle Pomeroy _therapy on Instagram. I also host a little local podcast where I interview other therapists and help people kind of get an idea of who they are to see if they might be a right fit for them in working with them.
Therapist matchmaker?
I'm like a therapist matchmaker.
I love it.
Yeah.
What's the podcast name?
It's called The Right Fit.
The Right
Wow,
Fit.
I love it. And do you interview therapists of all kinds, like not just couples therapists, but others as well?
I love
Yep.
Great.
that.
I've actually listened to it and I love it.
Oh,
Because
thank
like
you.
I obviously feel like my main need right now is couples therapy, but in talking to these other ones, I'm like, oh, take away from that, take away from that.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
you know, it's really good.
It seems like I think with couples therapy or with marriage issues, there is, as we're kind of talking about it, like there's self
other
issues, and
things,
I think
yeah.
that's awesome that you see each person of the marriage individually as
Yeah.
well as together, because
Yeah.
it's a very complex.
It is
union.
complex. Yes, it is.
Well, I know we're going to have a lot more questions from our audience. We didn't
Yeah.
get to all of them today, and I know more are coming, especially once we air this. Can we do a live with you on Instagram sometime?
I'd
and
love it.
Ask
That'd
some
be
more
great.
questions.
Yes.
Get more free therapy.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, so
We're crossing a boundary. You
Yes,
guys.
sorry.
Okay.
We'll try to pay. Well, thank you for joining our Brave Conversation.
Have some brave topics you'd like us to discuss? Leave your suggestions below. We'd love to hear from you.
And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that bell notification so that you don't miss our next episode. We will be having more exciting guests.
Are you ready for more? Click on the next video for more brave conversations.
See you next week.
Hey, brave girl, how you do the things that you do?